But in a situation where you find that you look like the same,
not necessarily tribal or regional.
but I have said that.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, it's Daybreak on Trust Television, and I have as our analyst for this morning my guest on the newspaper review, the energy editor of Daily Trust newspaper, Mr. Simon Ochewe from Sunday. It's a pleasure to have you join us in the studio this morning.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
All right. We looked at quite a number of issues. We want to dwell on those that seem to have direct bearing on households in Nigeria, as reported by the Daily Trust. Baskets of tomato now cost 70,000 in the south. The alarm was first triggered in Kwara State last week when the same Daily Trust reported that a basket of tomato was going for as high as 56,000 naira in Kwara State. Today, we are seeing that prices have quadrupled in Lagos, in the FCT, and even in places like Kano, that is known for the production of tomato, and housewives are now resorting to paste or dried varieties. And of course, farmers are saying this is so because of pest attack. What's your take on what is happening to the prices of tomato?
Yeah, I don't think it's something it's alarming actually because of the rising inflation, but I really don't think this is the first time. Usually, I remembered in 2016, exactly this time between May and June, when the rainy season is just setting in, the prices go up. I think there were times the baskets were up to 60,000, but maybe this is the first time we're hearing of 70,000, but it has happened before. But it's alarming because inflation rate as at 2016 was around maybe 12-13%, unlike now that we have up to 20%. And then the World Bank is still saying that we are going to be in food crisis. Majority of African countries will be in food crisis. And I think this is what is rearing its ugly head already from the reports.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about inflation. We all know the importance of tomato in virtually every household in Nigeria. What does this speak to? We have been dealing with this pest for quite some time. You remember the takeoff of the Dangote refinery that was stalled because the paste refinery that was stalled because this same pest, something Tatula, if my memory serves me right, came striking, and even a company with a big war chest like the Dangote could not contain. It doesn't appear that we have done anything, to better the situation. It appears this pest has come to live with us permanently.
I think that pest is a big issue that the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development will have to take on, especially in the incoming administration, because yes, we know that farming is a liberalized practice, but where there needs to be intervention. I remember was in 2007 also when we have the bird flu. You remember the Samba funds and other. A lot of things happened with the bird flu struck, and then the federal government intervened by cushioning the effect. I think this tomato thing, we are taking it so, will I say lightly, but then tomato is actually an ingredient that you find in almost every daily meal of Nigerian, and I don't think we should take it lightly because this pest issue it's a big problem, and if it continues that way, you see, last year we also had the pest issue and we had flood to eat too. So if these things continue without a strategic intervention, I think it's going to be tough.
Yeah, just to let our viewers know that Nigeria is the 14th largest tomato producer in the world. I think it also speaks to not just fighting the pest, but what is our food security strategy going forward? Because these things happen and they are natural occurrence. What do we do when we have no pest attack? How do we manage the excesses that appears to rot away, as we have seen even in the case of mangoes and oranges in the Middle Belt and all of that? What should we be doing as a country to preserve the excesses we produce and mitigate this kind of occurrence?
Yeah, storage facility is quite important. I know that the federal government, Ministry of Agriculture, has silos and others, but that's for grain. But for these perishable items, if you watch very well right here in Abuja, most times from 10 p.m., 11 p.m., you see these trucks or mini vans moving up to Lagos and others with these things. And if anyone does break down till the next day, you see how these things get perished already. And there was a solace that was for the marketers of tomato, I think way back in 2017, they could take it up to Burkina Faso, Niger and others through the land borders, but customs stopped this. And this is even more of the problem. So if you don't have those technology, the solar and other technology, the dryers to dry your tomato, I tell you, my brother, a lot of them get to waste. And in the Hausa parlance, we have what we call the gwergweje, the baje. It's now farmers begin to count loss.
Unfortunately, what a situation. And you continue to look at this, then they will also tell you that electricity becomes a major consideration, because with constant electricity, even households can actually convert their tomatoes to paste and have them stored up for as long as they want in their freezers. Away from the issue of tomato is another sad development yesterday. We woke up to the story of how 38 persons were killed in Takalafia, it was, a community in Nasarawa State. We had a report earlier on showing the deputy governor showing up at the burial of those families and assuring the communities that something will be done to counter, or rather to bring the perpetrators to book. We get those kind of assurance every time. It appears it is only a shooting word until the next attack happens. What exactly is happening to our rural community? What could have been the factor that would have instigated this kind of attack? Okay,
I think if I read the report correctly, it was between a farmer and a herder whose herd moved into the farm, and then there was some altercations. Unfortunately, it resulted to death and then reprisals. And this is actually the template we keep seeing, not just in Nasarawa State, in Benue State, in Plateau. You see these things almost everywhere, where there are herdsmen and there are farmers. You see this kind of thing always. My quick take is, I know that there are policies and orders, but implementation is key. For no reason, whether rearing of animal or farming, should anyone take anybody's life. I don't think it is. But things continue to go badly. Every time you hear of these stories, and seriously, it's not good. On both sides, there are casualties. It's really not the best of time for anyone. But I think that in these communities, there are heads. The heads of those who do the animal husbandry, and then there are also the rural chiefs for those who are farmers, peasant farmers. I think there should be a kind of synergy, in every rural community, where there should be a town hall meeting at least every month, so that they can resolve their differences, rather than allow intrusion and altercations, lead to loss of life. There are more ways we could do this. And then rural policing is quite important. I think that's where we are not really paying attention to. We see in the urban cities, the police are everywhere. But right there in the rural city, how many police, is, if you're to put the ratio to maybe the population, it's a problem. Security is crazy.
Other Nigerians have talked about exploring other options to resolving this problem. It appears that we have depended on the narrative that suggests that it has to be a government-led resolution.
Yeah.
Are we come to the point where communities, should start setting up a dispute resolution mechanism themselves? Because what happens is something happens, nobody intervenes, one person feels aggrieved, then takes the law into his hands, and before you know it, it escalates, and we are now recording deaths even far more than we will get on a road accident and all of that. Should we begin to see civil societies move into developing templates to begin to bring these persons together, find common grounds to resolve issues like this, rather than wait forever for government intervention?
Yes, like I mentioned town hall meetings. I think the civil society should take charge. It shouldn't be, I think our civil society nowadays are concentrated more on politicking and others, fraud. But then there are other human angle issue, human interest issue like this one. And I think it's a very good one if we could find one or two CSOs moving around to intervene, setting up this dispute resolution mechanism. Even if you go for the security and others, the police, remember we don't even have enough technology so far in Nigeria to track these culprits. Some of these people that come to do these attacks, perhaps they might not even be from that community. So how do you track them? But if there are dispute resolution mechanism and common grounds that people could come together and say, okay, this is our space. Whatever happens to us is still our space. They could find a way to create a kind of bushel around that space, and if anyone is aggrieved, they could quickly manage it before the crisis escalate. In fact, there's something we call managing expectation, communication crisis. If this communication is managed very well, this crisis won't result to that extent of fatality or even fisticuff.
Interesting. And moving on to another story that has got tongues wagging recently was the move by the federal government to secure $800 million for what they call palliatives, which would amount to about 5,000 naira for about 10 million households for 6 months. They had already secured that approval from the World Bank, and we saw the president write to the National Assembly seeking ratification, as it were, for that loan to be approved for palliative. But there have been a number of tongues wagging about the motive, the sincerity of this government. Some people call it a parting shot. They said one for the road. So the question really is, if you have deferred the decision on the removal of subsidy to the next administration, why are we in a hurry to approve palliatives to be shared to poor households before or within the next 2 weeks, which is the remaining lifespan of this current administration?
Okay, of course. You see, I want to, take us back to what two of the ministers, I think one of them is the Minister of Water Resources, said at the last Federal Executive Council meeting last Wednesday. He said that the government is a continuum, and that when President Muhammadu Buhari was appointed, he was appointed to stay until May 29. So the ministers had until May 28 to do their job, and that in that processes, documents will continue to come, approvals will continue to be given. So legally, they're doing their job. But then the moral of it, where people are talking about experts and others who have questioned this, is first, if you say you're doing this, you're going down on this thing so that you can give a breathing space also for the incoming administration to take also a decision on this. So why do you have to do the Senate work and others? But one thing we should know is that definitely whether the incoming government delays or immediately takes out subsidy, the petrol subsidy, I think from what I'm seeing, is going to be removed. And I think these people just want to continue to do the job. Because even if, I don't know if the Senate has approved it and then disbursement can happen in there, because the committee that has been expanded according to the Minister of Finance has to sit. And when they sit, they'll have to bring up their recommendations before they implement it. So even if the approval is given now by the National Assembly, I don't think the implementation will be okay. But then people are saying, why rush? Why don't you even leave everything for I think the 10th Senate or so to do the National Assembly, the incoming guys to do the job, rather than you running and running, since you now have a committee, and the committee comprises of, the Nigeria, the outgoing administration and the incoming administration. So it's a moral burden.
It is indeed a moral burden, and we understand that people will continue to put out their own perspectives. Others have also argued that if we had said we spent so much on the subsidy, why not, now that you will be removing, why not take whatever you are saving from the removal to implement this social welfare scheme, rather than resort to a fresh borrowing to do that, So the arguments abound. We will see where all of this leads to. Government is a continuum, of course, but the new administration is beginning to appear like it would depart from a lot of the policies of this government. Moving on to another story, you talked about moral burden that seemed to raise the question of moral burden, and that is states paying governors jumbo pension. The Punch did a report showing that the states that are particularly paying governors jumbo pension owe about 3 trillion in debt. And so the moral question is, how can we sustain a practice that continue to leave the state impoverished when in the same state you have pensioners, merely from the teaching profession or even the civil service, who are being owed arrears of somewhere in the region of 8 to 10 months. How do we How do we balance this narrative?
I don't really know when it comes to the Nigerian system. I don't know how this works, because I believe that governorship or whatever is a political office. It's not a civil service. And the first instance is, why do we even need a pension for a political office holder who breezes in? It's just like appointing an MD of an organization, and after his 4 or 5 year term, he leaves. And then the MD, are you going to pay him pensions? It doesn't happen in the industry so far. In all the sectors, I have not known of any MD that takes pension, except if the MD was a career civil servant and then he retires before he was appointed as MD. So why don't we have the governors also do the same thing? Why don't we have the state houses of assembly, implement similar, codes, protocols to manage this affair? I remembered when some of them are governors, were governors, and now they are ministers, and they're taking pension. Like one of them from Lagos, they take pension. And what do they say? They say they didn't set it up themselves. That's always what they keep saying. So are you now saying that after serving for just 4 years, you now continue to give pension for life, when the civil servant who has served for 35 years, at times most of them die, if not for the PITA, the Pension Transitional Administration or Directorate, Arrangement Directorate, and even now with the contributory pension, those who are still under the old pension system, the Pension Act, are still suffering. We see them carrying placards and everywhere. They serve for 35 years, not 4 years, not 8 years. I think that with the incoming administration, a lot of things should change. Everything does not start and begin and end at the federal level. Even at the state houses of assembly, all the people coming in, the legislature, they should look at these ways of reforms. And look, we are talking about 77 trillion debts now. The debt profile of the whole country, and you're talking about these states are owing 3 trillion. If you take 3 trillion out, you have. So you see where the drama is.
Absolutely, big drama there. I wish we had time to continue to look at a lot of issues. I wish we had time to also engage the issue of Nigerians evacuated from Sudan. We understand we have 4,500, but we have, as of today, reached about 2,500. There's still so much Nigerians stranded there that we need to bring back home and show that indeed that we care for our citizens wherever they may be stranded. I want to thank in a very special way our newspaper analyst for this morning, the energy editor of Daily Trust newspaper, Mr. Simon Echewefun Sunday. It's a pleasure to have you join us in the studio.
I'm glad.
And thank you very much for the perspective you bring to the newspaper analysis.